What's good, y'all? It's Noble. Today I have a different video than anything I've ever done on this channel. This is actually the first episode in a series I'm starting that's basically going to be a sample making crash course. In this series, I'm going to break down all the aspects of being a sample maker, whether that be arrangement, sound selection, sending your loops out, making connections. And I'm starting it off with how to get started as a sample maker and producer in 2021. So this video is going to be a lot of the basics. But yeah, I hope y'all enjoy the series. Without further ado, let's go straight into the video. So the first thing you need as a producer and a sample maker is a DAW. That stands for Digital Audio Workstation, and this is where you're going to make all your music. By this point, the majority of you watching this video should already have one picked out, but I use FL Studio. A lot of other people use it, and I would recommend buying it. There's a lot of reasons for this, but one of the ones that I'm going to talk about later in the video is that you'll get all the plugins that it comes with. Alright, so now that I got that out of the way for the beginners, I'm going to start talking about what you need to do after you've already started making music. So the most important thing as a sample maker is that you have to build your own sound. A couple years ago, there wasn't a lot of people making loops, and so it was easier to get recognized and noticed if you had talent as a sample maker. Now with the saturation of making loops, you need to find a way to stick out. For me, that was finding inspiration from producers like Psilo and Jasper Harris and really embracing that Space Boy sound and making it my own. And of course, having a sound doesn't mean that every sample you make is always going to be in the same genre. It just means that you're building a sound that you're going to be known for and recognized for. Your goal should be to get to the point where somebody hears a sample and they say, oh, that sounds like a Noble type sample, or that sounds like a Psilo type sample. And the reason they're able to say that is because your sound is defined. And in terms of how to build your sound, I think the best way to do it is to draw inspiration from others, whether that means using starters or midis or watching streams, YouTube videos, whatever it might be. Drawing inspiration from things and adding your own touch is a great way to build your sound. So now that you're at this point, you've been making loops, you've been building your sound, you're ready to start sending your samples out. Dropbox is my absolute go-to for everything music related, especially being a sample maker. This is a look at how I organize my files per month, and in each week you can see I'm putting loops, a separate folder for midis and starters, and a folder with my tag and some terms and conditions. I would definitely recommend having some kind of terms and conditions in the loops that you're sending out, because the last thing you want is for your loop to get stolen and for you to say that you didn't do enough to prevent it. And yeah, also remember to have a link to your BeatStars so people can add you as a co-producer when they upload with your samples. Now, if you're a little bit new to sample making, you might not understand why I have this folder formatted like this. Essentially, what I do as a sample maker is I send out loops every week. What I used to do that is an email list with BCC. BCC stands for Blind Carbon Copy, and the reason that you need to be using this is so that other people who are on the email can't see the email addresses of people you're sending to, and you don't want to burn bridges and lose connections just because you didn't click a button. If you're not sure what to use for a subject, this is what I use. You can feel free to steal it. So at this point, you have a DAW, you're making loops, you're finding your sound, and you're sending your samples out. And now you need to start making bigger connections. The most important thing to realize as a sample maker is that everybody is DMing the bigger producers, not just you. The chances of you DMing Marshmallow and asking him to send him loops and him replying are very, very low. What you should be doing is, instead of going straight to the bigger producers, you want to be networking with people who are on a similar level to you. You might not realize it, but the people around you are going to gain traction in the same way that you're going to gain traction. And from there, you kind of want to think about the industry as a ladder. Unfortunately, sample makers are most of the time at the bottom. We start by making a sample, maybe we send it to somebody who adds to the sample, sends that to a producer, who sends that to an artist, song then gets cleared by the label, and then you made it to the top of the ladder. Once you think about it like that, you can realize why you can't try and jump from the first rung to the top rung. You have to make your way up slowly, or at least slower than straight from the bottom to the top. So at this point, you're making loops, you found your sound, you're sending emails out weekly, and you're beginning to make bigger connections. It's usually around this point where you might start to get discouraged. Making a lot of samples in a day can ruin your motivation sometimes. And in those cases where you're getting sample blocked, or you're getting discouraged, or you're losing motivation, I think the best thing to do is take a break. You don't have to be making loops all day every day. It's only going to make you less creative than you would be if you took breaks. And on that note of not getting discouraged, it's also important to realize that everybody in this industry has their own path and their own timing. Your age, how long you've been making beats, how long you've been making samples, none of that determines where you're going to be. You just need to trust the process and realize that everybody moves at a different pace. Alright, so I think that the easiest way to explain how I collaborate with other sample makers is to break down a loop I made that has 3 producers on it, so that way you can kind of see how the process comes together. So yeah, this is what the full sample sounds like. Crazy. Alright, so some people might not agree with my opinion on this, but I think the most important part of using starters is actually removing sounds, not adding them. The first thing I do when I get a starter is remove sounds that I think don't fit, and sometimes even changing the chords that are playing. For example, when I play this starter, you're going to hear that there's one note that sounds out of key that I had to fix. Now you might think that other producers might care if you remove sounds they added because they want them to be in the final sample, but to be honest, if the final sample that you're making is hard, it doesn't matter if you kept what they added or not. I sent this sample back to Noah and he loved it, so I wouldn't worry about that at all. So yeah, all I did to fix this was set the declicking mode to generic, and I just chopped it up a little bit. Here's what it sounds like with the chops. Now the only thing I have here for effects is sketch cassette, but there are sometimes cases where I get starters and I have to put a lot of effects on them. But when that happens, it's not because it necessarily sounds bad, it's just that I can hear in my head how I want it to sound, and so I have to use effects to manipulate it to make it sound like that. It's also important to mention that if I'm using a starter that has multiple sounds, I'll separate all the stems and put them on different mixer tracks, but for this one I didn't have to do that because there's only one stem that I'm using. To be completely honest though, I usually only like to work with really simple starters. It's a lot easier to have creative freedom when you don't have too much to work with. It's good to just work with starters that are in that sweet spot, that are simple but also have a lot of bounce to them. So keep that in mind when you're sending out starters to sample makers or when you're using them yourself. So from here I added this flute run for my Nirvana sound kit with Kabeh. And you can hear how it's filling up that space. From there it needed a bass, so I went to my Cadence Volume 2 one-shot kit, which is dropping October 1st, and I chose this one called Butterflies. And one of the last things I did was go into the Kinetic Treats Bank in Contact, and I used this preset called Electric Train Set. Here are the effects I use, the most important being the Mango Smear preset in Portal. So after this, I exported the loop, put it in my weeklies, and I didn't think much of it. And about a week later, one of my favorite producers to work with, Curly, texted me, and he basically said this. He said, I use the loops Alora, you and Noah, and Riptide, you and TB made, and I made a loop with the stems of both of them. Take a listen. Now before I play the sample that Curly sent me back, this is a loop I made with TB that he was talking about. So out of all the elements in this loop, the only one that ended up in the final sample was these strings from Contact. And the way I'm able to have the notes slide into each other is by using the portamento feature. Now the thing that's crazy about how Curly chose to combine these two is that this sample was about 2 months old, but this never would have happened if I hadn't been consistently making samples with Curly. And that's why I think it's important to make lab samples consistently with producers that you work well with and to know how to do it. Now here's my favorite part where you get to listen to everything come together and form a cohesive product. Crazy. So once again, when I play what Curly sent me back, you're going to notice how there were some parts I had to cut out. For instance, if you listen to this section, you can hear that he pitched the pluck up an octave. Not a bad idea, but I just didn't like how it sounded. On the flip side of that though, he did pitch the flute down an octave, which sounds crazy. Also real quick, the way I'm having it do that reverse thing at the end is the default preset on Crystallizer. And now you can hear those Contact strings from the sample with TB come back to play their role. Also real quick, I did mention earlier that when I'm working with something with multiple stems, I do separate them all and put them on different mixer tracks, and you can see that here. But yeah, the next sound is actually something that Curly added that sounds crazy. I still haven't asked him where he found this, but it's this high-pitched violin lead. So yeah, from here I had to add a bass, but here's another tip. If you ever notice that a sound somebody added like a bass is weak, you can still keep it in the sample, but just add your own so there's 2 layers. That's what I did here, and it sounds like this. It ended up making it sound even more full. From here I added that same Kinetic Treats from earlier. I forgot to mention earlier, but when I use this preset, I do turn the synth volume all the way down. And one of the last things I added was these pizzicato strings from Contact. Here's what they sounded like before rendering them out and pitching them down. And after pitching them down and adding some sketch cassette. From there I added one of my favorite accents from Cadence Volume 1 called Lust. And yeah, the last thing in the sample actually came after rendering it out. That's something that I think you should get into the habit doing as a sample maker if you're not already. A lot of times I'll actually do it in a completely new FOP, but for this one, since it was just one transition, not a lead or anything else like that, I kept it in the same FOP. Here's what it sounds like. It's from Vegan's V3 kit. And yeah, here's what that sounds like in context with the sample pitched down 100 cents. Crazy. That's gonna be about it for the video, y'all. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe and also like the video. And yeah, man, thank you all for the support. I appreciate it a lot. And I'm gonna go ahead and play a beat I'm in with the sample now. So I'm out of here. Peace.
Let's go, Noble.